Our next speaker is Ben Simonson. Simonson. I always call you Ben Simonson, even in my class. It's terrible. Okay. His advisors are Mariana Nadeo and Kerry Jackson. And I'm just going to let people move very quickly. Ben went to Tarragona. His majors are biology and Spanish. And he is going to be talking to us about teaching the prosodic encoding of given information in English among L1 Spanish, L2 English learners.
Okay, yeah, exactly what Julie said. I spent 8 weeks in Tarragona. It was my first time going abroad, and such a wonderful experience. Yes. We worked at the Riviera Virgili University. And it was such a wonderful town to stay in. We could walk down the street and see an old Roman amphitheater. We could walk across an aqueduct just a few miles north. It was really an incredible experience. And we even got to travel around Spain. We went to Barcelona, which was like an hour train ride away, Valencia, and Madrid. And all in all, it was one of the best experiences of my life. The main subject of my research was processing instruction, which is a teaching model that uses structured input activities to teach learners a target structure by comprehension-based activities that help them make a form-meaning connection between the target structure and the meaning of an utterance that they hear or read. In this study by Van Patten, it was originally used to teach direct object pronoun placement in Spanish. My experiment aimed to expand this into prosody and see how it works there. So the target structure that I aimed to teach was anaphoric deexcending, which is a phenomenon in English where given information that would normally receive stress in a broad focus setting loses that stress. Instead, new information is highlighted with stress, and this is a very common prosodic pattern in English, but not in Spanish, which makes it something difficult for them to learn as they're acquiring a new language. So an example in English would be either just a question of what happened, Sam hit the ball, or just a question, or the sentence, Sam hit the ball, where stress falls sentence final in an SVO sentence. If the question were presented, what did Sam do with the ball, it would be very natural for someone to say, Sam hid the ball, moving stress off the object onto the verb. In Spanish, however, that doesn't happen. Stress is generally sentence final and isn't moved to highlight new information. So the research questions that I aimed to answer were, can processing instruction be used to teach anaphoric deexcending to L1 Spanish, L2 English learners? And does feedback during the processing instruction activity affect someone's ability to learn? The experiment consisted of a pretest and a post-test, a perception and production test, and the training was a perception-based training that involved two groups. One that received processing instruction with feedback, and another group that performed the same input activity but did not receive feedback as they went along. I had 21 participants in the feedback group and 22 participants in the non-feedback group, all of whom were intermediate level English speakers. Today I'll be presenting the production data, but if anyone has questions about the perception data, I can answer those afterwards if there's time. There were 4 types of stimuli that they came across during the experiment. The training conditions appeared in the training and the tests, and the untrained conditions were only in the tests to see if they could expand what they learned during training onto new types of stimuli. On the object repeat, stress would be moved off the object and onto the verb. In the verb repeats, the verb is in both the question and the answer, so it's repeated information, and stress is on the sentence final object, which aligns with what a Spanish speaker would naturally want to produce. And the 2 untrained conditions were a non-lexical repeat, so a non-literal repetition of an object, so stress is still moved onto the verb, and stress on subject, where it's exactly what it sounds like. in the production task, participants would hear a question, and then, I don't know, is there sound?
Why are John's clothes wet?
So the question would be, why are John's clothes wet? And then the participant would see a,
I'm sure it's a volume. You can continue.
and the participant would see a, would see a screen with pictures and words to help to guide them in producing an answer.
Why are John's clothes wet?
And then the desired answer would be,
John washed his clothes.
What happened?
Don't worry about it.
and then each of the responses that they produced, I segmented and analyzed where they put stress and where they should have put stress. So in this one, it was the desired response would have been she brushed her hair, but the actual response was she brushed her hair.
He gets 2 extra minutes.
Okay, and in the training, it was a little bit reversed. They would hear an answer with a specific prominence pattern, and then they would see 2 questions on the screen, and they would have to pick the most appropriate question for how the answer was said. And we were very careful not to give them explicit instruction on either how anaphoric extending worked or to focus on prosody. Instead, we said, focus on how it's said. And in the feedback group, after they chose an answer, they would either see correct or incorrect, and the non-feedback group would just move on to the next question. Now, as for the results, in the trained conditions, which is where stress, in the verb repeat, where stress would fall on the sentence final object, participants performed very well, which is what we expected. It aligns with what they would naturally do in Spanish. There was a very marginal drop from the pre to post test, suggesting that they may have been overcompensating for what they learned to move stress off the verb and onto the object. And there was generally no difference between the group that received feedback and the group that did not. In the object repeat, which was more of interest, where anaphoric deexciting took place to highlight the verb, participants showed improvement from the pre to post test. They improved significantly. However, there was not a big difference in between the groups, which suggests that feedback may not have played a very big role in them learning. Instead, it may have just been the input that they provided during the activity and the exposure to the target structure. In the untrained condition, the non-lexical repeat, again, performing anaphoric deexciting, they improved from the pre to post test, but between groups there wasn't a very significant difference. And when stress fell on the subject, there was not a big difference, not very much improvement, and no significant difference in between the 2 groups' performances. So the main points that I took away from this were that participants were able to improve on conditions where anaphoric deexciting moves stress off the object and onto the verb, and there was no big difference between the feedback and no feedback group, suggesting that input by the participant and the exposure to the target structure was enough to help them learn. Another interesting finding was that the perception-based training activity helped them improve on their production skills. As far as how this could be applied to teaching, when teaching prosody, explicit instruction on how target structure works isn't necessarily important, and that exposure and input by the learner is really what helps them learn. And another experiment that I'd like to try is giving a group explicit instruction and see how that compares with the data we found. some people I'd like to thank, and we can open up to questions.
So it occurs to me that the instructions you gave are not the least don't focus on prosody. So you could say, here are some examples. Just listen to them. You know.
Right.
So do you think that? So why did you elect to do what you did? Do you think it would be just impossible task that to say, just pay attention to this? Do you think they would learn from very little input, very little focus on prosody?
We were trying to minimize their instruction to do that. I think they still would have picked up on it. Maybe not as quickly, but still exposure to it seemed to help them.
Other questions?
So,
Did you look at the time course of when they started using the prosodic example during the training session? Or did you not record that?
we did. I'm sorry, could you repeat it?
So maybe you could see, maybe in the post test, the two groups picked up the prosody basically pretty well, but the group with feedback picked it up faster, for example. So maybe your training session was just too long.
Right. We marked their trial criterion as they were doing the training, and the feedback group did seem to pick up on it faster, but it didn't seem to show much in the testing.
Okay, so feedback helps speed of learning, if not overall proficiency in the end. I mean, that's
That's a nice point. Any other questions? Very nice. Thank you very much.